Welcome to the TechLink Health Podcast, an on-demand source for the top trending healthcare topics and insights. Delivered by key opinion and emerging leaders and as featured on the TechLink Health app. The healthcare industry is rapidly evolving, so our goal is to connect listeners to the most relevant insights, ranging from digital health to financial well-being to interesting side gigs. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the TechLink Health Podcast. I'm Govind Shantharam, and I'll be hosting this episode today. This episode focuses on the evolution of precision medicine and the ways it will contribute to a healthier future. Today's guest is Dr. Joseph Geraci, data scientist, mathematician, medical scientist, quantum machine learning entrepreneur, and founder of NetraMark, which creates augmented and quantum intelligence for pharmaceutical companies. He uses mathematical structures to strip away the cacophony of noise that is inherent in medical data sets, where the goal is the ability to predict the most effective treatment for individual patients. Currently, he works on several cancer projects and mood disorder treatments. He utilizes graph theory, topology, geometry, statistics, dynamic systems theory, and beyond to do so. I think it goes without saying that Dr. Joe is a very interesting individual with an impressive background. So without further delay, please welcome Dr. Joe. Dr. Joe, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Of course. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So to give our listeners some background, can you take a moment to introduce yourself in a little bit more detail and tell us about your journey into precision medicine?
Yeah, sure. So when I was younger, I was always really interested in the biological sciences. I always thought I was going to become a physician. But what ended up happening was at university, even though I was studying neuroscience and biochemistry, I ended up with all my degrees in mathematics because I had this feeling that mathematics was telling me something fundamental about how the universe worked. And so after finishing my undergraduate, I went and did a master's in pure and applied math. And then after that, I started doing a PhD. The PhD started in mathematics, but then an Israeli physicist gave me a problem in quantum computation. And I started having this revelation that these quantum computers will be able to be used for things way beyond what we were thinking. And ultimately, I found that quantum computers are powerful, but they're not limitless. And that was a big part of my study as a mathematician. So then I had all these opportunities in quantum computation and physics and mathematics, but I left in order to study medicine. And so not as an MD, but I won a postdoc to do cancer work. So while I was doing my PhD, that problem that the Israeli physicist gave me caught the attention of the American military. And so they funded me and I moved to California, and that's where I did my work. But I ended up coming back to Toronto and working on cancer projects. And then that turned into an award to do machine learning in medicine. And then that turned into another award to do neuropsychiatry. So what I've basically been doing is 10 years of mathematics and machine learning over the last 20 years, and then another 10 years of medicine, especially in the neuropsychiatric space and cancer space. And so what happened was I ended up having a revelation about how mathematics and machine learning could be used to derive insights about how to redefine disease. And this is really where precision medicine comes down. It's if you look at a disease that, let's say we use the term Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease is this term that we use for this syndrome of dementia. But really what's going on is that it's a bunch of different diseases. It's a bunch of different disorders that stem from different molecular circuits breaking or things we don't even understand. And so I realized there's a way to use machine learning and mathematics by adapting standard machine learning methods to get the machine to learn about these subpopulations and then have a human interact with it and like a human expert, like a scientist. And in this way, we've been able to understand things about cancer we've never had before. We've been able to understand neurodegeneration in ways we haven't. And this is leading us to new therapies as we mature. And so one quick example is you can give this technology a lung cancer data set and you ask it to learn about two different types that you know about. And what it does is it comes back and it says, you know what? One of your types is actually 3 different subtypes. And after a year and a half of testing, the technology works. We know we can validate that this thing is actually amazing at discovering these subtypes. And so right now, yes, I'm involved in some certain psychiatric disorders. I'm involved in aging, the whole longevity space, which is very heterogeneous. You can imagine there's a lot of reasons why we age and we fall apart. There's a lot of different paths that happen. And of course, we have cancer projects. We just signed a great deal with a group that takes cancer solutions in the immune space and turns them into companies. And then we have projects in neurodegeneration, which we're really excited about. So that's basically the four areas. And really, my whole focus in the last several years has been, let's figure out a way to expose the real definitions and differentiate the subtypes precisely according to the mechanisms at play. This is hard work, right? It's a combination of biology and chemistry and machine learning. Kind of explains why I have such a broad background.
That's absolutely incredible. So you're on the forefront of modernizing medicine by recognizing a role computation, machine learning, and mathematics can play in a very murky biology. I'm wondering, for those who aren't as familiar with the idea of big data, small data, where do you see the large data sets playing into the analytics and ultimately into the generation of a treatment plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. The big data sets, it depends what you mean. A big problem in medicine, something that has to be clear, right, to people, is that when you have a huge amount of data, you can use these really great novel methods that people have been using for years, but now the computers are powerful enough to really do some magic with them. And these are these deep neural networks. The problem is you need a huge amount of data, and then you can start making predictions. And what's happening with those data sets, these are usually government data sets. This is not something you find in a clinical trial. These are like government mandated collections of data sets where you can sift through and you can start understanding how to make predictions about certain outcomes and so forth. A big problem that we sought to solve is when the data is smaller, like in a clinical trial with 300 people. That might sound like a lot of data, but it's not, because what happens is the machine has a challenge. It's like, I've seen 300 people, and now I need to make a judgment on the millions of people in the world. And sometimes that's possible. But anyway, the techniques we have are faulty at that. Yeah.
Sure. I think when we have some understanding of precision medicine, a knee-jerk understanding is that there's a big data set and machine learning and data scientists tap into that data set and they generate some understanding of that data set that is very applicable to the patient level. So I'm wondering, are you able to use big data, or maybe you're using just small data? How are you navigating the effectiveness of these data sets, and where are you gathering them from?
Yeah, I got you. So what happens is there's some groups that actually have access. I mean, you can imagine 23andMe, this group that collects SNPs and stuff. They have massive data. And what they're able to start doing with some of the machine intelligence methods is they're able to start making some decisions at the patient level. Yes. And to do that, you need a huge number of samples, and then the machine starts doing it quite accurately, because there's so much difference between us that the machine has to get smart enough to say, okay, it's this perspective and this perspective, these different aspects that make you who you are. Now, the challenge, though, is that there is so much smaller data. There's a lot of great smaller data. How do we utilize that? And that's really where NetraMark is focused. Small data. And I'll give you an example of what we've been able to do. As a company, we have all of machine learning because we have machine intelligence experts in these tech. They have funny names like random forest and XGBoost and convolutional neural network, all this stuff. But then we have some specialized techniques. And I'll tell you a story. This is really cool. There's this amazing ALS data set. So we have this amazing data set, and the data set was paid by a family who had a major loss in this disease. And the data went to this California institute, and I gave them access to my technology. And the way I handled this problem, how do you do precision medicine when there's smaller data? So this data cost a lot of money. Let me tell you, it's like $1,000 per person to get the data that we got. And so you can imagine by the time you get to 300 people, your bill gets up there. So I developed a system that you can actually give access to a scientific expert. And you ask the machine, listen, I want you to learn about the difference between these two different aspects of ALS. For example, some people who have a more aggressive form, some people that don't have it, you can compare them in various ways. So what we do is we set up the data and we set up the system, and we let the scientists, this is really the future. The machine discovers things about the data, and it doesn't just do what you learn. It actually discovers the precision medicine part. It discovers these patients belong together in this way, these patients belong together in this way. And then the scientist is able to say, hey, look at this. Why are these people clustering together? And she takes her mouse, she circles that body with the program, and the machine says, these genes are what's driving this. Now, this is very exciting for the scientists because within moments of interacting with the machine, they're now back into their home territory, right? It's not about the math and the AI and all this and program. They're now, these group of patients are held together because these collections of genes are doing something. And then they go back, they look it up, they do their systems biology, and they say, wow, you know what? Maybe we can drug this, or maybe we already have a drug that works for these specific people. And so this is what we've been doing. This is where we are in terms of our product development. We find a way for the machine to learn things that we can't because things come together in such a complicated way. The machine resolves this, and it actually shows you, hey, these two groups of cancer patients are different because of this gene. And this gene relates to how aggressive the lung cancer forms. And it's amazing when you see this happen right in front of you. We had an example where we used actual microbiome data. I'm literally talking about poop, right? And so everybody, there was either controls, healthy controls, or people with inflammatory bowel disease. And the AI, we didn't tell it that a subpopulation were Crohn's, but the machine did it itself. It actually isolated these people, and it was ready because when it's ready, it presents this map, right? And it says, these people are different. And then we're able to go in and look at the labels and say, wow, the machine rediscovered what Crohn's disease is. And over and over. And that's our approach. Our approach is you equip the scientists with a tool that is capable of finding these insights that we would never find on our own. And then you have the scientists validate it. Now they say, you know what, this is just noise, or wow, this is actionable. And that's how we're doing it.
That's absolutely fantastic. Amazing to hear. And this is what I want to also hear about some of the successes you've had in either drug repurposing or indicating expansions for drug use. Can you maybe take a second to tell us, some of the success stories very specifically with any drugs you've had?
Yeah, so we now have relationships in cancer with a company called Portage. We have relationships in aging with Juvenescence. We have a psychiatric relationship that I'm not allowed to announce yet. And then we have a cognitive aging relationship that stemmed from the work of Dr. Howard Federoff. He's achieved a lot in Alzheimer's, and he has his own Parkinson's drug that he just raised money for. And through these partnerships, we've had several of these successes. But I want to tell you something very cool that came out of it. Howard, he had the insight to collect a certain type of genetic data. So there's like static genetic data, and then there's the actual what are the genes doing in Dr. Joe or in Govind and so forth, right? Okay. And so we collected these data, and he had other AI companies look at it, and they're like, oh, the data's too small, but we can build this predictive model. And he's like, I don't want a predictive model. I want to know what's driving these patients. And so what he did is he collected data about super-agers, right? Just to give you a bit more detail. So these are individuals who, as they enter into their 80s, they have no cognitive decline. They have the same brains they did when they were in their 40s, 50s. Amazing people, right? And then we also had people that transitioned to dementia and controls. And so he gave us the data. And first thing we did is we developed these maps and showed him. And he was already like, wow, I can actually inquire the machine and ask what's going on in these subpopulations. I go, yeah, but we have something else. And this is something I haven't talked about yet. So we have another system that we call the Netra Health Atlas. And the goal of this system is not to involve the human anymore. It's to create a map of all diseases and how they relate to each other. Does schizophrenia relate to heart disease? Does heart disease relate to Alzheimer's? And so this system that we built is a marriage between systems biology and this precision AI stuff I've been telling you about. It's a marriage between them, right? So the machine figures out what's going on. It looks at it in millions of different perspectives. It isolates it through some reinforcement. It realizes, okay, these subpopulations have something meaningful. Then what it does, it yanks out the genetics from these groups. And then it does a bunch of mathematics and systems biology and says, here's the Achilles heel that you want to target. And then it goes to a bunch of drug and plant databases. And it says, hey, this plant molecule over here that was used for sinus, I'm just making this up, it can be used for dementia. So we did this for we took the super-agers and we compared them to normal. And the machine did something amazing. It figured out things like metformin, things that we already know. It figured out other drugs that are actually in trial. But the magical thing is it pulled out a couple of nutraceuticals that got Dr. Federoff excited, that are now becoming assets into another company. And we discovered a drug that could be repurposed. We called the person who owns that drug and says, hey, the mechanism of action looks like you can take a normal person with mild cognitive impairment and maybe boost them up. And they're like, yeah, that's interesting, but we have a better formulation. And so that's where we are now. Now we're figuring out, what do we do here? What kind of play, right? Like, we're trying to evolve our business model. Our technology's only been out there playing with data now for a year. We just developed it. But this thing is amazing. For a machine to be able to figure these things out that other scientists have figured out, it did it in 15, well, okay, I'm exaggerating. It did it in like 6 minutes, but it took people years to figure out that. And we've done this with Parkinson's data sets, and we got it right. Like, we've done a lot of validation. So now we have this tool that can repurpose and reposition drugs and also figure out new disease definitions.
That's absolutely fantastic. What you've been able to build is incredibly interesting, because when clinicians or scientists run their studies, the indication for the drug often is born out of that study. If the study is limited, the indications might be limited. Rapamycin being one of these. Rapamycin is only FDA approved for transplant patients who need to be immunosuppressed after. If you can find an indication that goes beyond the transplant patient, now you might open up the space for what the role of rapamycin might be in longevity. And that is an absolutely fantastic approach to practicing medicine.
I can see that. You see that. And rapamycin is very exciting. Actually, we just the other day, we discovered another natural product that behaves like rapamycin. And it's our AI. We have an aging data set. So we have skin samples from like a 1-year-old all the way up to 96. And the AI was able to pull this out. We put it through the system. And of course, rapamycin comes out, right? Because the mTOR and all that. But I pulled out some other stuff. Our approach now is this. Just to summarize, right? There's a bunch of great machine intelligence, machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it. And these tools are great, but you need a huge amount of data. And also at the same time, you need to know what you're looking for. And so what we did is we found a way to mathematically build a platform that can integrate all of these methods, but make it possible for physicians and scientists to interact and for it to handle smaller data. So we have to basically reinvent a new paradigm for the machine to learn.
Amazing to hear. On the issue of reinventing a new paradigm, I'm always interested in companies that are pushing the envelope. Do you find a role for some of the regulatory agencies, in this case, FDA specifically, in ultimately allowing a marketplace to open up for these new products? Have you had any issues in the regulatory space?
This is an excellent question. And this is something that was on my mind from the start. So this is what I've done. I've developed a relationship and met with the FDA right before COVID in Washington. And that meeting was great. Just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke at the European Medical Agency, one of their events, around the future of AI in clinical trials. So this is my attitude. Yes, both of these bodies are going to have to get to know my tech. But I found another solution, and it's this. You get a really intelligent physician scientist that comes through and says, hey, I think I've discovered a new aspect of ovarian cancer. These women are surviving their platinum-based treatment. And the reason they're surviving is ... And thank you, NetraMark, we did it with your system. And then what we do is we go to the FDA and we can say, hey, by the way, we can resurrect the failed drug because of our system. Now, that might be true one day. One day they might be able to look at the Netra AI and say, okay, we recognize you as a... But what we do now is I figured out a different way. I figured out that those insights can be put into very simple machine learning methods, like a logistic regression or a random forest or whatever, like standard stuff, or even a deep neural network. And that would be sufficient. And so then you get the people at the FDA who are comfortable with the technology. And the only mystery is, how did you figure out this collection? And all we have to do is just say it's validated, right? And so that's the way we're handling. We're taking the insights we're getting from this complex machine we built at this stage, and we're using it to derive simpler models. So, and that's the way we're helping speed this along.
Awesome. I want to switch gears and talk about cost for a second. As you are well aware, healthcare in America is exceedingly expensive. I suspect in 2020, it'll probably be more than $4 trillion with COVID. Where do you see precision medicine bending that curve the most? In which space of cost cutting is your work in precision medicine really going to help the most?
Yeah, and this is a major interest of ours. It's actually the insurance companies, and we have been very fortunate because a very large pharmaceutical company has contracted us to understand the efficacy of one of their drugs, simply because of this reason, because the drug is more expensive, but the insurance companies want to know, why should I dish out for this drug when there's another drug? Very clear. We're coming to you to make that decision. You're like, no, take the cheaper drug because it costs me less. Okay. But if you use precision medicine to say, look, these individuals are at risk because of this effect, or they're going to actually respond and thereby they're going to be able to go back to the workforce quicker, then these insurance companies are going to utilize this information to make decisions about what drug people get in order to optimize cost and to speed up recovery, which is what a country like the United States is going to need to do. So to generalize, precision medicine and these techniques we're inventing are fundamental to move this type of medical system like you find in the United States forward to cost savings, because you'll be able to identify what drug is best for what people. And sometimes you do need the more expensive drug because it will save lives, right? And sometimes you don't. And we're also going to discover other things. Some people shouldn't be put on any drug. For example, if you're talking about, let's say, major depression, sometimes they do need a drug because their form of major depression is very dangerous. It's an inflammatory process in the brain, etc. They need a drug like that. But other people, eventually, we're going to have the sophistication to say, this person should just start meditating and exercising, and they'll get better. And that's the way I really see the cost-saving potential. That's really where it lies, is exactly in this example you brought up.
Sure. And I'm wondering what challenges NetraMark faces the most. What's most apparent as a hurdle you have to face in this large healthcare ecosystem?
The main challenge is in the insurance companies and the bodies having a unified body of data that we can get access to. But then that brings it to a bigger point. We're this small startup in Canada who has some profound technology, and why should we believe you? I literally had somebody at a conference stand up and say, Dr. Joe's really smart, but why did he solve this problem? And so this just demonstrates this attitude of, why should it come from Toronto? Why should it come from Canada? And also the idea of there's these standard methods. We need huge data sets. And it's all of these different attitudes that we're facing. But it's fine, because what we do is we just don't go away. We stick around, we keep hammering, and we manage to score a major deal. So I think that's the critical thing, is recognition and getting people used to it, like everything else.
Yeah, I think in general, healthcare historically is just incredibly slow to move, and attitude and culture is a big part of that. But on the discussion of change, what technologies do you think are going to accelerate that the most? Less so from an attitude and culture perspective, but actual technologies. Do you think there's something that's going to push the envelope much faster?
Yeah. So from my experience, I've worked with all kinds of data, like everything from SNPs, simple, like you have this variation in your DNA and whatever, right? To, like I mentioned before, poop and methylation, like these epigenetic, like did you smoke when you were younger and did you alter your DNA in your lungs, etc. Okay. So it's the technologies that are allowing the measurement of these things. So RNA-seq is this technology that what it does is it not only captures the sequence in your DNA, it also captures how many copies are being made. And it also catches this other machinery that's going on in your genes. It goes way beyond the simple of, I'm going to look at your DNA, your ACCG, TTCG, right? It goes beyond that. It actually can see, you're making a lot of extra copies of P53 or whatever gene, right? Okay. So I'm excited about the proteomic, measuring epigenetics, those technologies. And what's happening is my relationships now academically, right, as a professor at Queen's, and my relationships in the United States, I'm starting to see this. And as this advances, I'm going to be able to integrate, basically smush all of these different data types together. And I'm going to be able to say things like, you are going to respond well to drug X because your microRNA has these properties. And then somebody else, the microRNA has no meaning. It doesn't have any predictive value. It's their microbiome, the microbiota, some bacteria. And it's this kind of spectrum that you're going to get out of smushing all this stuff together. And I'll give you an example. The first time I saw this was way in the beginning of NetraMark. I got access to a depression data set, and there was some of this microgenetic stuff in it. And the people modeling the data were having trouble. They weren't, the models weren't replicating. So I took a look at it, put it through a baby version of what we have now. I put it through the system. And what it did is the machine said this: I cannot explain these 40% of the people. I can't explain it at all with the data you gave me. But these 60%, it's very clear to me that they're not going to respond to this drug. And this is the reason why. You see what I mean? And that's the power. So it's the combination of this next generation intelligence, machine intelligence, with the ability to measure these things and smush them together.
Yeah, that's amazing. When you describe precision medicine, it's not just personalized to the individual, but it has a high degree of granularity that historically we don't have in medicine. You know, we might get blood tests, we might get, fecal occult tests, but not to the degree that it's pushing towards atomization, where you can get it at the proteomic level, where you can get it at the P53 level. That's a very, very granular type of data. That's amazing. Dr. Joe, I want to be respectful of your time. So in closing, do you have any final recommendation or insight for those interested in staying connected with this new wave of innovations in healthcare?
Yeah, so I'm going to toot my own horn here because it's an opportunity. Find NetraMark online. Find me on LinkedIn, Joseph Geraci. I post all the time. We were in the news today because Canada is a great place for quantum, and NetraMark is part of that environment. Obviously, I played a role in quantum, and it's part of our technology. But yeah, just follow us on NetraMark. I put updates on the webpage.
Awesome. Yeah, no, we'll be sure to link to your LinkedIn page and NetraMark's website in the show notes. And with that, we will wrap it up there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was terrific.
Thanks for listening to this episode. TechLink Health is a healthcare advisory platform for consumers and organizations to stay informed with the latest insights while connecting with healthcare experts for telehealth, e-consults, and consulting services. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.